I didn't know anything back then, but I was certain of one thing. I would never, under any circumstances, confess to my mother that I knew about her secret. And suddenly, I realized just how much my mom loved me. How fiercely, blindly, selflessly she loved me. I understood how incredibly lucky I was to have her in my life. I was walking home through the familiar streets of our town, but it felt like the place didn't recognize me anymore. The trees lined up perfectly along the sidewalks didn't recognize me. They had grown alongside me, year after year. The birds I had always fed during the coldest, hungriest winter days didn't recognize me. Even the neighbors who had known me since childhood didn't recognize me. A few hours earlier, the street had seen a confused, innocent child running from home. But now, an adult woman was returning, almost fully formed. Someone who had glanced into the cruel mirror of life for the first time. The city was warm that day, as if summer had returned in the middle of autumn. The sun was shining brightly, the birds were chirping, and I ran out of the house in my school uniform and white apron. It was my birthday, 16 years old. I skipped down the stairs 2 or 3 at a time, eager to meet my neighbor Uncle Tony, with whom we shared a communal kitchen. He always greeted me with a cheerful, "Hello, Sparrow," even though I was never particularly chatty. "Why aren't you wearing the new sweater?" he asked, noticing my excitement. I stopped in surprise. "How do you know about the sweater?" "Well, of course I know," he chuckled, grinning. "I saw your mom knitting it late at night, hiding away in the kitchen. She was in such a hurry to finish it before your birthday." I spun around quickly, dashing back home, my heart racing. "Did I forget something?" My mom called out from inside. "Notebook!" I shouted, grabbing a small bag from under the pillow. With one last glance back at Uncle Tony's surprised expression, I ran back to the street, my mind buzzing. At the post office, I almost didn't recognize the young postal worker behind the counter. She looked at me, worried. "Are you okay?" she asked, noticing my frantic state. Yes, I stammered, clutching the postcards tightly in my hands. "I just want to make sure everything's in order. Were all these sent from here?" "Yes, they all came from our city," she replied, a little confused by my urgency. "What's the problem? Is there an issue with them?" No, everything's fine," I said, hurriedly gathering the postcards. "Nothing to worry about." As I rushed out, I realized that none of the postcards had anything to do with my father. And somehow, I wasn't surprised. My mind raced back to the moment when I had seen my mother working late into the night, knitting that sweater. I didn't know then, but I felt the connection. That sweater was a gift of love. I didn't go to school that day. Instead, I ran through the streets, my chest heaving, my heart pounding. When I finally collapsed onto a bench in a nearby park, I carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was the sweater, a beautiful, soft mohair sweater. It was the kind of thing I had always dreamed of having, the kind my classmates had all talked about. My mother had made it for me, a symbol of her love. She had put her soul into knitting it, just for me. I sat there in disbelief. How could she know exactly what I wanted? How did she know? She must really love me, and in that moment, I loved her more than I could ever express. I wanted to wear it right then and there, but my mom wouldn't let me. "Don't ruin it," she gently scolded me. "It's beautiful. You can wear it later, when it's cooler." I couldn't stop thinking about that sweater as I hurried through the city, passing familiar faces and old landmarks. Everyone seemed so different now. I felt as though I had changed, as though I had grown up all at once. I didn't know how to look my mom in the eye when I got home. How could I face her after everything I had discovered? After all these years, I had finally understood how deep her love for me was. I felt as if I were a different person. The world had shifted around me, and I could no longer look at it the same way. As I walked home, I realized that childhood was over for me. I would never be the same again. And when I finally came home, I found myself face to face with my mother, who had been waiting for me. I didn't say anything about what I knew. I would never tell her that I understood her secret. I would carry that burden on my own, as a sign of my love and respect for her. Life was never going to be the same again. I was no longer the girl who ran through these streets, unaware of the complexities of the world. I was a woman now, and I could never go back. The sun was beginning to set as I walked down the suburban street, my mind still reeling from the shocking truth I'd uncovered earlier that day. The warm breeze seemed to mock me, carrying with it the familiar sounds of neighbors laughing, children playing, and the distant hum of a passing car. I had always thought of this neighborhood as home, but now it felt like a distant memory, a place I no longer belonged. I had changed. I had seen something that could never be unseen. In my hand, I still clutched the carefully packed bundle of postcards that had once seemed so innocuous, so innocent. Each one had been carefully written, each one bearing a different stamp from various corners of the city, but none had been addressed to me. None had been sent by the father I had longed for, the one I had pictured so vividly in my mind for all those years. I felt like a fool, chasing after a phantom, chasing after a man who never truly knew me, and perhaps never truly cared. I tried to shake the thought from my mind as I neared the house. The white picket fence that had always made me feel safe now seemed like a symbol of everything I had lost. The life I had imagined, the picture-perfect family, had crumbled to dust. I could feel my heart racing as I approached the front door, and yet I knew I had to face my mother. There were no more secrets between us. There was no going back. When I stepped inside, the smell of freshly baked cookies hit me, an old comfort that only my mother could provide. But even that seemed tainted now. My mother was standing by the kitchen counter, her back to me, humming softly to herself as she worked. Her face was serene, her hands deftly moving as she prepared dinner. She looked up when I entered, her expression brightening as she saw me, but there was something in her eyes that I had never noticed before. It was as if she knew I had found out the truth, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Hey, sweetie," she said softly, her voice warm but tinged with uncertainty. "How was your day?" I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing. How could I ask her? How could I even begin to confront her about the secret she had kept for so many years? But in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I had to know. I had to understand why she had lied to me, why she had kept me in the dark about my father. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling. I found the postcards. Why did you keep them from me? Why didn't you tell me the truth about him? About what really happened?" My mother's face seemed to pale as I spoke. She set down the spoon she had been holding, her hands trembling slightly. For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes looking everywhere but at me. I could see the pain etched in her features, the guilt that had weighed on her for years. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted you to know, honey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted you to hate him, to think badly of him. I wanted you to have a happy childhood, to believe in the story I told you, the one I thought you needed to hear. But the truth? The truth is much harder to bear." I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. The truth. The thing I had been searching for, the thing that had haunted me for so long. But it was a truth that came with a cost, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you trust me enough to know the truth?" My mother finally turned to face me, her eyes filled with tears. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched my cheek. "I'm sorry, darling," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I've hurt you more by keeping it all from you." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to feel, but in that moment, I realized something. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where the truth could finally set us both free. I wasn't a little girl anymore. I was strong enough to hear it, to understand it, and to face whatever came next. Together, we would heal from the past. We would find our way forward. And maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for us, despite everything that had happened. And as I stood there in the kitchen of the house I had once known as home, I felt something shift inside me. A sense of peace, however fragile, began to take root. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face whatever came next.